Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. Today's episode is about sparking independent thinking and critical reasoning. It also includes everyone's favorite thought experiments.
Honestly, it's just got these incredibly different viewpoints, almost like two different worlds looking at the same thing.
Yeah, it's a classic case where one side sees something as like inevitable destiny, historical fact almost.
And the other side?
The other side looks at that exact same idea and finds it, well, confusing, maybe even absurd, and pretty alarming.
We are talking, of course, about China and Taiwan. Specifically, this really intense push from Beijing for what it calls unification.
And trying to understand why that very idea feels so, I guess, wrong or just doesn't compute for most people actually living in Taiwan.
So our goal today is to kind of unpack that. We want to look at the history, the politics, the identity piece, all the layers that make this gap so huge. Really get inside the perspectives.
Yeah, we'll dig into the stories each side tells itself, ask some critical questions. And we've even got a thought experiment later that might make you see things a little differently.
It's about trying to step into those different shoes, isn't it? See the view from their angle.
Exactly, because at its core, this whole thing really just smacks of a fundamental clash, different memories of history.
Right. And just deeply, deeply different ideas about politics and values.
So you've got the view from mainland China. Beijing sees Taiwan as, well, fundamentally part of China. Always has been, in their view.
Like it's just a piece of unfinished business from history.
Pretty much. A leftover from the Chinese Civil War back in, the late 40s, something that just has to be resolved. Unification is the goal. It's seen as making the nation whole again.
Okay, so that's one side. Powerful narrative.
And then you look across the strait and you got Taiwan. It's been running itself for, over 70 years now?
Yeah, a long time.
And in that time, it hasn't just been separate. It's built its own distinct identity, its own way of life, and maybe most importantly, a really vibrant democratic system.
Which is worlds apart from the system on the mainland.
Totally different. So, okay, let's start with Beijing's side. What's really driving this push? Why is unification such a non-negotiable thing for them?
Where does that intensity come from?
Well, there are a few key drivers, and they're all kind of woven together in the official story and, their political priorities right now.
Okay.
First up, the historical claim. The official narrative, what's taught in schools in China, is that Taiwan's been part of China since ancient times.
Right, you hear that phrase a lot.
They point to history, like being part of the Qing dynasty, and see today's situation as just the last chapter of the Civil War that hasn't quite ended yet.
So it's presented as just fact, historical fact that dictates the future.
Yeah. And look, this isn't just talk. It's actually written into their framework.
Yeah.
The PRC Constitution says Taiwan is part of its territory.
And they have laws about it?
Yeah, things like the anti-secession law. That law explicitly gives them the legal basis from their perspective to use force if they decide peaceful unification is impossible, or, if Taiwan were to formally declare independence.
Wow. Okay, so it's history, but it's legally backed up from their side. But it feels bigger than just history books, doesn't it? There's this huge nationalism piece, this national rejuvenation idea.
Oh, absolutely massive. For a lot of people in China, and definitely for the government, getting Taiwan back is tied up with overcoming what they see as a century of national humiliation.
Since the Opium Wars, that period.
Exactly. When foreign powers pushed China around, carved things up, took territory, and Taiwan itself was under Japanese rule for 50 years, remember?
Yeah.
So unification becomes this powerful symbol.
A symbol of what? Strength.
Strength, pride, correcting historical wrongs, restoring China to its, quote, rightful place. It's central to that whole great rejuvenation narrative, especially under Xi Jinping. It's about national wholeness.
Okay, so history fuels the nationalism, which fuels the push. Makes sense.
And that ties into another piece, internal legitimacy for the Communist Party.
How does Taiwan play into things inside China, like domestic politics?
Well, think about it. China's huge, complex, lots of internal pressures, economy, social issues, keeping everyone on the same page, pushing for a big national goal like unifying Taiwan. That can be a really powerful tool.
How so?
It helps rally people together, build national unity. It strengthens the central government's hand. And sometimes, let's be honest, it can shift focus away from tricky domestic problems. The party positions itself as the only force that can achieve this national dream.
So it helps unify the country and shores up support for the leadership.
Right. And then don't forget the hard-nosed strategy.
Location, location, location. Taiwan's position is critical.
Incredibly critical. It sits right smack in the middle of what military folks call the first island chain.
That string of islands running down from Japan.
Yeah, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, it's seen as a key strategic line, especially thinking about U.S. and Japanese defense postures in the Pacific. If China controlled Taiwan, its Navy could get out into the wider Pacific much more easily.
It would break that chain.
Exactly. It could challenge those defense lines. And it's not just military. Think about shipping lanes.
The Taiwan Strait is one of the busiest in the world.
Absolutely vital for China's trade. Its energy imports.
Yeah.
So control there is huge economically and strategically. And from Beijing's view, any U.S. involvement, like selling arms to Taiwan or sailing ships nearby, is seen as meddling, as provocation.
Okay, so pulling it all together from Beijing's perspective, you've got this sense of historical rightness, deep nationalism tied to past grievances and future ambitions, usefulness for internal politics, and just core strategic and economic needs.
Yeah, you pile all that up, and from their angle, it creates this incredibly powerful, almost unquestionable drive that has to happen.
Okay, that's a clear picture of the view from Beijing. Now let's flip it. Why does that exact same idea, unification, feels so utterly strange, even offensive, maybe absurd to most people in Taiwan?
Right. This is where that lived experience just creates this massive disconnect. It starts with just completely different memories and realities.
70 plus years of doing their own thing.
Exactly. The government in Beijing has never, not for one day, ruled Taiwan. And during those decades, Taiwan went through its own journey, this process of localization, finding its own identity.
And the big one, democracy.
The huge one, moving from authoritarian rule to this really energetic, open democracy. They vote, they have a free press, freedom of speech. It's just a fundamentally different system, a different way of life than on the mainland.
So the CCP, the government in Beijing, just has no lived legitimacy for people there. They've never been governed by them.
None. People in Taiwan choose their own leaders. They argue about stuff openly. They have freedoms that just don't exist under Beijing's control.
And that feeds right into the identity issue, which seems massive here.
It's maybe the biggest piece of the puzzle for why unification feels so alien. Most people in Taiwan today simply do not see themselves primarily as Chinese.
Their identity is Taiwanese.
Overwhelmingly. It's been growing for decades. They might acknowledge, shared culture or ancestry way back, but their identity is Taiwanese first and foremost. The survey data on this is striking.
What does it show?
Consistently, you see well over 60% identifying only as Taiwanese. The number identifying purely as Chinese is tiny, like under 5% usually. That's a huge shift, reflecting their separate history and their democratic experience.
Wow, over 60% only Taiwanese. That says a lot.
It really does.
Yeah.
And that leads straight into the clash of values. This is why unification often sounds less like a happy family reunion and more like a threat in Taiwan.
Because their system is so different.
Totally. You have Taiwan's democracy voting, speaking out, getting information freely online, versus the mainland's authoritarian system with censorship, control, limited rights. So for people in Taiwan, the idea of being unified under that system.
It doesn't sound like joining equals.
No. It sounds like a degradation, like being taken over, annexed, losing the freedoms they've built and cherished.
The fear is losing the right to vote for your leaders, losing the ability to criticize the government, losing access to an open internet.
Yeah, the fear is becoming like Hong Kong, basically, where those promises of one country, two systems, keeping things separate just evaporated much faster than expected. Freedoms got squeezed.
Which points to maybe a disconnect in how Beijing sees Taiwan, this idea of an imagined Taiwan.
That's a good way to put it. Often the view from the mainland, especially filtered through state media, seems to be that most Taiwanese are really just compatriots, fellow Chinese.
Who are just being led astray.
Yeah, misled by a few separatist politicians, or somehow held back from embracing their true Chinese identity. There seems to be a real underestimation of how deeply people in Taiwan value their democracy, how strong that Taiwanese identity is, and how much they genuinely want to keep their autonomy.
They value democracy more than Beijing perhaps understands or acknowledges.
It seems that way. So yeah, the gap is huge. Beijing sees history, destiny, national glory. Taiwan sees a direct threat to its freedom, its identity, its whole way of life, from a government it sees as foreign and authoritarian.
So that analogy you sometimes hear, it's not like family members wanting to get back together.
No, from the perspective in Taiwan, it feels much more like some powerful person you don't really know suddenly shows up at your door.
Right.
When they say, hey, my great-great-grandparents owned this land hundreds of years ago, so actually this house is mine now.
Yeah.
And you have to live by my rules.
If you're the person living in that house, who built your life there?
It feels terrifying, illogical, deeply unfair. That's the feeling it evokes for many in Taiwan.
Okay, let's dig into that feeling. Let's put on our critical thinking caps for a minute. It seems useful to really ask why about China's stated reasons. Do they hold up if you look at them objectively? And the big one, does Taiwan's actual opinion just not count?
Right. Is this push really about what's best for people in Taiwan, or is it serving other agendas? Let's take Beijing's reasons one by one and apply some critical questions based on analyses you see out there. First, that historical claim. Taiwan since ancient times.
Okay, but what does ancient times actually mean for who rules today? Does ruling somewhere centuries ago give you the right to rule it now, especially when the people there have built a totally different society?
Well, critics point out, yeah, parts of Taiwan were under the Qing dynasty, but that was patchy, and it only became a full province really late, like 1885. Before that, you had indigenous peoples. And today, international ideas often stress self-determination, right? The will of the people living now.
Not just old maps.
Exactly. So from that critical view, the ancient times argument looks less like a solid legal case and more like, well, picking history that fits your political goal today, a narrative choice.
Okay, what about the nationalism, the national revival argument? Is that feeling genuine or is it like manufactured?
It's probably a mix, you know. National pride is real, but state media and education in China definitely shape and amplify that feeling around Taiwan. But the critical question is, even if the feeling is real for many mainland Chinese, does their national feeling give them the right to override the democratic choices of people in Taiwan?
Yeah, and if nationalism is so key, why can't Chinese citizens themselves freely choose their leaders or speak their minds? That seems like a contradiction.
Right. The analysis often suggests that nationalism, while real, gets used by the state to rally support and control things. That doesn't automatically make it a good reason to force unification on unwilling neighbors.
Then there's sovereignty. It's our territory.
The basic claim. But again, whose sovereignty are we talking about? Is it the government's right to territory, or is it the people's right to govern themselves?
If sovereignty comes from the people, like democracies usually believe,
then shouldn't the clear will of the Taiwanese people, shown in their elections, count as a form of sovereignty that deserves respect? Just saying, it's mine, from across the water, when the people living there disagree. Critically, that looks like putting the regime's desire for control above self-determination.
Okay, what about the money argument? The idea that Taiwan would be better off economically if it unified.
You hear that sometimes. But the immediate counterexample people point to is Hong Kong.
Right. The one country, two systems promise was supposed to last 50 years.
And it didn't even make 25 before freedoms were seriously rolled back. Plus, is China's economic growth built on freedom, or does it come with losing basic rights?
And can money really make up for losing the right to vote or speak freely?
Exactly. So critically, that economic argument seems to totally miss or just ignore what people in Taiwan say they value most, their democracy and freedom. It's not seen as a good trade. It's seen as losing everything important, a degradation.
And finally, this idea that Taiwan's opinion doesn't count or that people are just misled by so-called separatists.
Beijing uses the word compatriots a lot. But the critical question is that word used with respect for their choices, or is it just a way of saying you belong to us? How can people making democratic choices in free elections be called kidnapped?
Especially when election after election in Taiwan, including the recent one in 2024, shows people consistently voting for parties that don't want unification on Beijing's terms.
Right. And if Beijing really thought Taiwanese people secretly wanted unification, why would they be so against Taiwan ever holding, say, a referendum on its future? The logical conclusion is they're afraid of the answer.
So if you put all that critical analysis together, what's the takeaway?
It suggests that Beijing's main arguments, the selective history, the amplified nationalism, the state-first view of sovereignty, the economic promises that ignore values, and dismissing Taiwan's democracy, they just don't really hold up as convincing reasons, morally or legally, to justify forcing unification.
And it raises that really powerful question you mentioned earlier. Is this urgent push for unification really about the Chinese people's needs, or is it more about the CCP regime's own anxieties and political needs?
The analysis seems to point strongly to the regime's needs. Unification is used to rally support, boost legitimacy, maybe distract from problems at home. For the party, Not achieving unification looks like failing on that big promise of national rejuvenation.
So it becomes essential for the party, for its story, for its hold on power.
Exactly. Which, critically, doesn't make it Taiwan's problem to solve, nor does it make the reasons compelling if you value things like democracy and self-determination.
Okay, this feels like the perfect place for that thought experiment you mentioned, a way to maybe feel this gap emotionally.
Right. Let's try this. Imagine, just imagine, North Korea suddenly announced they were going to unify China.
Whoa, okay. North Korea unifying China. How would that even work?
Well, imagine Pyongyang starts saying, look, based on ancient history, parts of China were linked to Korean kingdoms. We share ethnicity. We're part of the greater Korean nation.
Uh-huh.
And they declare that unifying China is necessary for their national rejuvenation. It's a strategic must. Maybe they even claim their Juche idea is superior, and they need to liberate the Chinese people from, I don't know, capitalist influences.
And North Korean TV is full of this military drills near the border simulating an invasion. Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, how do you think ordinary people in China would react? Emotional.
Anger. Just immediate, visceral anger. Are you kidding me? Unify us. Disbelief, you must be crazy. Resentment. Who the heck are you to tell us how to live or that we need liberating? Well, that probably point out North Korea's own situation, right? You want to take us over? Look at your own problems. People are starving. Just total rejection.
Notice anything about those reactions?
They sound remarkably similar to how people in Taiwan react to Beijing's unification talk. That same sense of outrage, disbelief, resentment at being told what to do by an outside power they don't accept.
Exactly. It hit that same raw nerve. Feeling like your identity, your home, your choices are being dismissed and claimed by someone else who you feel has absolutely no right.
Okay, so that's the gut reaction. What about the more, rational arguments? How would people in China critique North Korea's claims in this scenario?
They'd tear the history apart, right? Ancient kingdoms, that was centuries ago. It means nothing today. They totally reject being ruled by North Korea's system. We have our own way. We don't want your juche.
They definitely wouldn't accept the ethnic argument as a reason for rule. Okay, maybe some shared heritage way back, but that doesn't mean you get to govern us.
Right. They'd laugh off the idea that North Korea has a better path or ideology. Thanks, but I prefer my life, maybe even my slightly freer market and the economic promises.
Forget it. You think you can improve our lives. Your own people are trying to escape. And they'd absolutely hate North Korea, trying to define who's a true Chinese patriot based on whether they welcome unification. You don't get to tell me who I am.
See, this little flip reveals all the core friction points, doesn't it? The anger at being claimed without consent, the fundamental clash of political systems and values, the dodgy use of history, and that sharp irony, someone with huge problems claiming they're going to fix you.
The real power here isn't just the logic, it's that emotional parallel. It lets someone maybe feel, just for a second, what it's like to be on the receiving end of that kind of narrative from a powerful neighbor.
It highlights that this isn't just about abstract history or politics. It's about identity, self-worth, the right to choose your own damn future without being told you belong to someone else.
It's that feeling of, yeah, I can be proud of my heritage, but that doesn't mean you own me or get to decide my life.
Precisely. And it leaves you chewing on those questions, doesn't it? If you think North Korea has absolutely no right to unify China, why? What's the fundamental reason?
And if you're clear on that, then where does China get the right to unify Taiwan? If you had a totally free choice between, say, the North Korean system and the current Chinese system, which would you pick?
And then, looking at Taiwan's vibrant democracy, which system do you think they would choose if they had a truly free choice without any coercion?
So, wrapping this all up, this deep dive really shows two vastly different worlds. Beijing's push comes from this internal logic of history, nationalism, political needs. It makes sense within their bubble.
But for Taiwan, with its own history, its strong, separate identity, its democratic life, that exact same push feels completely alien. It doesn't resonate. It just feels like a profound threat.
It's that gulf again. Historical destiny versus existential threat.
Seeing it as correcting the past versus seeing it as destroying the present. It's the difference between the ancestor claiming the land deed and the person living in the house they built seeing someone trying to break down the door.
One side looking back to claim a future based on perceived past glory.
And the other side, fiercely protective of the freedoms and the identity they've built right now.
So we've looked at the clashing views, the reasons swirling around them. We've tried to ask critical questions, and hopefully that thought experiment helped bridge the empathy gap a little.
Yeah, it really drives home how much our own background, our history, our politics, our daily life shapes what feels normal, what feels right, and what feels totally unacceptable or even crazy.
And maybe that's the final thought to leave everyone with. Beyond understanding the why from each side, perhaps the bigger challenge is recognizing how much our own stories and assumptions color our view, and how vital it is to genuinely try and see the world and understand what matters most to people through the lens of their lived reality, not just ours.
I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Micky to Life. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it.